Death Battle Season 8 is underway, but before we get too caught up in it, let us look back on the good times we had this summer with Death Battle's little brother, DBX. So, remember when I said in my last Death Battle video we would have a summer of subpar DBX episodes to look forward to? Boy, do I feel like an idiot now. For DBX did something groundbreaking this year. They made more than one episode actually worth a damn. Because of this, I figured instead of reviewing just a few episodes, I might as well cover the whole season. Even the Ringmaster segments have more substance thanks to the interchangeable hosts gimmick. I've never hated Ringmaster, it just felt like he needed someone to bounce off of with his over-the-top personality, and this season finally addresses that problem. With all that being said, and just what do you think you're doing, Buster? Nate, what are you doing here? What does it look like? Don't think I didn't notice you talking about Death Battle behind my back. That's my thing. Otherwise, what are you paying me for? Well, that would explain why my credit card keeps getting charged. Wait, shouldn't you be working on that red versus blue video? I can multitask. Besides, it's practically out of the oven. It'll be out before you know it. I've got everything 100% under control. Are you sure? Positive. Now run along, the grown-ups are talking. Don't you have another Skay Frillis or Vivzy video to react to? Man, I should have known that giving you more facial expressions was a bad idea. Who worry not, folks. Your favorite Death Battle commentator is back, here to give his brief thoughts about the most recent season of DBX. And I do mean brief. One of these days I plan on looking at DBX as a whole more in depth, possibly giving it the 10 words or less treatment, but for now I'd like to just get out my opinions on this most recent season for the simple fact that it's surprisingly worth talking about. Plus, I totally lied earlier about the red versus blue video because holy shit, it's taking way longer than I thought. Until then, let's run through DBX's 6th season starting from the beginning.
You're a fusion?
I should preface these reviews by saying each and every Ringmaster segment has spectacular looking animation. It's super fluid and lends itself to great comedic timing, with the 3D background acting as a great playground for shenanigans. Boomstick is an alright partner. It's nice getting a little more history on their past, but aside from that, their personalities don't feel different enough to lead to that much comedy. The fight isn't that bad for a season premiere, but has some things holding it back. It takes a while for the fight to build up. The beginning is pretty standard DBZ shit and has some of the weakest sound design on the channel, but once they get into their later forms, things pick up quickly. The best parts are little moments of, hey, that looked cool, such as the Kamehameha deflection, reality shattering, and getting punched around the earth. Although the latter will be promptly overtaken in coolness by another soon enough. Don't worry, we'll get there. The dimension hopping is neat, and the finisher is pretty lackluster. It's disintegration with really weird looking PNGs to boot. The alt, while not as creative, is at least more brutal and not as drawn out. Plus, both parties unfusing is cool and probably should have been in the other ending as well. Pretty solid episode and not much else. Before we move on though, could someone please explain this scene to me? Gogeta looks concerned by the off-screen effort noises, and then when Vegito shows up, he just shrugs it off. What is he shrugging off? What did Vegito mean by taking things seriously? Is it because he's not a furry anymore? Surely I'm missing something obvious, right?
Maybe it's the way you're dressed.
Look at it, MatPat. Look at it. Look upon what you've wrought. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for meme episodes, but I'd prefer them to be above average at least. The analysis ends up being the best part. Boomstick raging and losing his shit while trying to beat Sans is comedy gold, and Chad is great at selling the frustration. The fight has a beautiful background. These perspectives of both the series' battle heads were great, and that's about it. Ness mostly just uses his bat for combat and barely uses his psychic abilities. The combat feels far too slow considering how infamously fast Sans' attacks are. Sans' voice clips were overused and felt out of place since he wasn't even talking, but that's not the worst thing they did to him. Sans' character is nowhere to be found. Not only does he not get any of his signature puns, he just decides to viciously murder an innocent kid, making this one of the more uncomfortable deaths on the channel for me. Resisting the urge to make an obvious joke about getting boned. The alt is far superior, with Ness getting to use more magic as well as the fun smash that appears when he gets off his attack. Not a fan of this episode, really. Sure, it's tough to make characters like Sans interesting in a fight when they can only take one hit, but he's gotten some pretty spectacular fights in the past despite this obstacle. Clearly, this is an episode that should have stayed on Death Battle subreddit where it belonged.
Vegeta! I can't believe it. Oh.
This is my least favorite episode of the season. It made a fight on a train uneventful. How the hell do you do that? WizX is co-host this time and works much better comedically compared to Boomstick. This is because he and Ringmaster actually have clashing ideals in the form of how they approach research, and it leads to some pretty great jokes. Too bad this is brought down by a very subpar sprite fight. It's not abysmal or anything, but every time I watch it, I immediately forget what happens afterwards. The music is too low-key and doesn't feel like it builds up to anything, which sadly fits this choreography to a T. Whoever was in charge must have really hated Naruto, cause he barely gets any meaty hits in while Ryu kind of owns him throughout. Even when going into his strongest form, Naruto hardly lands a scratch on Ryu, but then after returning to his base form, he manages to one-shot him? Just don't think about it. My vote for best kill once again has to go to the alt ending. Not because it's actually better, but you know what? Just watch. His fucking face doesn't change. It doesn't fucking change. No, but this season is great, I swear.
Yo! Yes!
See, I told you guys this was a good season. It just had a rough start is all. Once again, Wiz and Ringmaster have some great comedic chemistry that turns into an all-out war culminating in Ringmaster fucking murdering Wiz. A fitting end to their arc, I'd say. The animation is pretty good and has plenty of memorable moments this time. Despite taking place in a desert, the environment is utilized in really interesting ways. My favorite bit is Black Adam using a pyramid as a drill on Apocalypse for how creatively savage it is. I also appreciate how Apocalypse not doing anything was due to his dizziness, as opposed to just putting his controller down. I'd consider this the most brutal shield break punish in history, which is a good way to describe this fight. Brutal. It's especially fitting for these characters. Their powers interact in interesting ways, with Apocalypse's morphing and Black Adam's blistering speed, with the sprites only sometimes clashing. The quality of the sprite work and the longer than average length makes this one feel like it's right out of season 2. Same goes for the death, which is super drawn out in the best way possible. Adam Shazams Apocalypse until he's nothing but a crisp, proceeding to MK Fatality him with an Android 18 style curb stomp to round it out. It's superior to the alt, which, while a creative use of Apocalypse's powers, feels like a cop-out with the actual death occurring off screen. Now if you'll excuse me, I believe duck season is right around the corner.
This is the last time I work with someone with a speech impediment.
This is where things went from good to great, folks. The rundown served as a pretty great character study for both combatants by DBX standards, using a diverse array of footage and getting across the essentials of their personalities. They even take this opportunity to lampshade the fact that Boomstick's basically been relegated to a butt monkey in recent episodes. Mecha Goose Howard is also a neat callback, but the real fun is in the animation. First of all, I love how it fully commits to the CRT feeling. It opens up just like an NES game, and the entire aesthetic runs with this concept from the sound design to the graphics. The slapstick gags translate surprisingly well into a sprite medium. We still get exaggerated facial expressions as well as expertly timed comedic moments. I love the decision to combine old school animation humor with the look and feel of old school games. It just makes so much sense, and it goes a long way in setting Donald vs. Daffy apart from any other episode. This DBX is by no means a conventional battle, nor does it try to be. From the very beginning, we get a fake out that legitimately caught me off guard the first time. It helps that this wasn't shown in the sneak peek. We even get a reference to Hermione versus Juggernaut. That's a great in-joke for longtime viewers. But then things get even more hectic as more ducks and even geese show up. We spend just enough time on each new character to keep the fight from feeling like it drags. It's a perfect way to elevate the chaos of an already bonkers concept. Really, this entire animation feels like what would happen if the Merry Melodies had access to pixel art back in the 30s, and it may as well be from the 30s with that music. I love this episode's soundtrack to pieces. Orchestra is the only genre fitting for these two. It perfectly complements the insanity and even has some callbacks to classic tunes anyone could recognize.
You wouldn't hit a guy with glasses, would you?
At first, the death is pretty underwhelming, but it's all brought home full circle by the Duck Hunt homage and a hand-drawn Bugs Bunny showing up to steal Daffy's win. That right there is so perfectly Looney Tunes and sees the CRT aesthetic through to the very end. I will always go with this ending, though I appreciate the alt for going down the less loony route and tapping into
Unhinged destruction.
Oh, Kingdom Hearts. Not to mention, setting up the alt ending as a different mode right at the beginning is fantastic attention to detail. The only thing holding this one back for me is the voice acting. acting. Donald and Bug sound great, Daffy not so much. Nick doesn't give a bad performance by any means, but his voice doesn't really suit Daffy's. He's a bit too nasally and sounds strained whenever yelling, a major part of Daffy's character. He gets the down pat at least. Even though this animation feels removed from the type of bloodshed we're used to on DBX, the tone and gags do a spectacular job homaging the golden age of cartoons. One of these days, we're going to get some kind of old school cartoon death battle episode, whether it's Bugs versus Mickey or Tom versus Sylvester. Before I would have said hand-drawn is the only way to go with these matches, but thanks to this episode, you could say I'm singing a different tune.
Wait! What's that? I think it's your honor.
Where?
I'd like to re-emphasize the importance of Ringmaster knocking Wiz out of commission before this episode came out. I don't think my brain could have realistically comprehended another Fire Daddy comment. Instead, we get Dummy, and this has to be his best appearance in anything yet. As opposed to being a one-off gag, he finally gets a turn in the spotlight, and the writing does a great job rolling with the idea of him being an emotionless being who doesn't understand the concept of comedy, like Twitter users. He even shoots down Marshall's attempt at making a Boomstick's dad joke. Let's freaking go! Here's a fun activity for those looking for social media clout. Just post this clip of Dummy, and wait.
You are not paying me at all.
I'm paying you in exposure.
Correct. You are not paying me at all.
Artists and voice actors will retweet and reblog the shit out of it. Compared to our last Avatar vs. Full Metal episode, this battle has much more going for it, other than the lack of voice acting. Though the decision to reuse Dom Din's voice clips for Zuko from when she played Jake Long is really damn clever from a meta standpoint. The animators learned from last time and made Zuko move much more fluently this time. It's not without flaws, but it's miles better than the choppy poses from before. We get a nice variety of his firebending abilities with the flying and lightning redirection. Roy's fire feels a little weak in comparison to his source material, but still manages to play off of Zuko's abilities fine enough. I really liked the sequence on the cars as well as the environment in general, especially in the climax where everything is covered in fire and looks super pretty. As for the death, while it's great to see Zuko getting to use his swords, this running animation of him is really silly and the killing blow lacks impact. Same goes for the alt, which, while a nice reference to Roy killing Lust, feels like a pitiful light show in comparison. I'll go with the original ending, since this sequence of Zuko blocking fire is really satisfying and showcases how much his rigging has improved. If there's one thing I can say Zuko vs. Roy does amazingly though, is the music. All on Me is a banger track that embodies the kind of butt rock I live for. Not a bad episode on its own, a fantastic one when you consider all the other Avatar episodes we've had. Korra, please save us.
This is Billy. All systems go.
Quick, guys, we need another DBX matchup, preferably with characters from popular kids shows from the 90s. Oh, how about these guys? What's that connection? They're smart? What else? They're blue? Ship it! I know I said before that Ringmaster was a lot better this year thanks to having people to bounce off of, but I still liked this rundown despite it just being him. Instead of a person, he got to play off of his crippling insanity. Gotta give props to Billy for not only selling the downward spiral, but also making the cardboard cutout sound distinct. And instead of doing straight up impressions, he made it sound like Ringmaster doing an impression of his colleagues. The actual fight is alright, the water effects are pretty, and there's some nice combo choreography. I really like this shot of the ice flying and then Billy zooming in while everything else is in slow motion, but there's quite a few issues holding this one back. Anytime we get one of those combo games, the sound design takes a nosedive. The hits feel too samey and don't have a sense of build-up. The sprite work may be well done, but there are some pretty janky moments, like when Billy makes Mercury look like a toddler due to the size difference, and they just don't blend well together. Also, what's up with these anime hero shots looking like they were exported in 240p? The explosion death is nice looking, and the alt, I'm honestly scared to say which of these is my favorite, because no matter the answer, I'm going to piss quite a few people off.
What the hell? How did that get there? It's not what you think. Research! You come across a lot of stuff in research.
While this is mostly an average episode, there are two things that keep me coming back to it consistently. The 3D background is one of the best looking ones I've seen out of this crew, and it leads to some fantastic shots. The other, once again, is the music. It feels like something right out of Crypt of the Necro Dancer, and I love that game. First orchestra, then butt rock, and now EDM? DBX is out here covering all the bases.
Submit to the heart of the kingdom as light, and darkness is darkness.
Maybe he's right.
Let me just say right off the bat, bringing in Devil Artemis as Perfect Cell for the SFM episode is a brilliant idea, and this analysis has plenty of his channel's sense of humor. What's unfortunate though is that most of the jokes don't come from a place of banter and more the characters being themselves. We get a few moments of Ringmaster and Cell butting heads, but they feel few and far between. Like for example, you've got this scene where Cell is talking on his own and Marshall isn't even paying attention. I'm not even 100% sure what the joke is, though I think it's just Marshall being confused because Cell is 3D and he's hand-drawn, but the crowd and stadium are also 3D? Just don't think about it. The Kermit bit was great at least. Moving on to the fight, we get kind of a no-brainer matchup for the SFM team to work on, considering how much they knocked it out of the park last time with Star Wars vs. Kingdom Hearts. And yes, I realize this is Blender, but SFM team is what we're used to, so I'm sticking to that. Actually, this fight was animated, oh, my bad, animashed by Devil Artemis alone, and I'd say he knocked it out of the park. The voice acting is actually amazing, especially on Papa Palpy's end. He's got the maniacal laugh and demonic war cry we all remember. And here I was thinking Spider with a Top Hat would be Liam's magnum opus in voice acting. Once again, the music is one of the best aspects, and here we get one of Brandon Yates' many commissioned tracks in the form of This Heartless Empire. I don't know if that was planned, but the fact that Brandon just happened to get asked by someone to make an 11-minute epic of these two fighting does wonders for this episode as a whole. I highly recommend listening to the full song if you've got time to kill. It's truly sensational. The effects on their powers are stunning, we get decent swordplay, and the overall look of everything feels worthy of being a full episode, except of course for the length. Yeah, the one problem keeping this from being one of the greatest DBXs of all time is how short it is. I can't be too hard on this aspect considering it was done by just one person, and while the quality over quantity proves effective, I can't help but feel this episode is mostly an appetizer in the long run for when this fight gets upgraded to a fully researched one, which I guess could be said for other DBXs, but here the issue really shows when a good majority of the runtime is just them talking at the beginning and end. I need to see more of these space geriatrics duking it out, damn it! Both endings have fantastic merits to them, and while Xehanort's is visually gorgeous, I feel it lacks a sense of finality. Once Palpatine dies, it just sort of ends. Even the music is vastly different between the two versions and feels more like a real conclusion in the YouTube version. Why? Because it actually uses the ending of the original song. But more than that, I prefer the YouTube ending for how much it gets Palpatine's character. When it comes to power, speed, and vast pools of magic to draw from, Xehanort has everything on lock, and as they fight, Palpatine begins to realize this too. So how does he win? By using his greatest strength, his cunning. Leave it to a backstabber like Palpy to pretend to lose a lightsaber only to take out Xehanort when he was at his most vulnerable. And I know I complained about the lack of action, but it feels super fitting for Palpatine to start gloating the moment his victory was sealed, and Liam does a spectacular job selling the slimy malice and cockiness in his voice. Could have been longer, obviously, but I'll take short but sweet over long and arduous any day. That being said, I certainly don't mind long and sweet too. Oh yeah, it's time, you guys.
Oh man, I thought this was gonna suck! That was awesome! Who knew those little fuckers could fight like that?
Before I actually get into this episode proper, I want to make it clear how much its mere existence means to me. Goomba vs. Koopa was the first episode of Death Battle I had ever seen, and even though it hasn't aged the best, it still holds a special place in my heart for introducing me to this show as well as the concept of verses in general. So, when I learned it was getting a rematch after all this time, I was beyond hype for what would probably be a cute and harmless callback to this show's humble beginnings. Boy, how naive I was. Firstly, the rundown was well done as always and marks the epic return of a fan-favorite Death Battle character that isn't the sloth, Jocelyn. I could tell she and Ringmaster are going to have a lot of great banter and chemistry once Season 7 of DBX comes. Assuming, of course, she stays, but come on, that's so obviously what this episode is setting up for next year. I'm just happy the team found a way to bring her back for good. But the animation? Where do I even begin? Well, from the top, I suppose. We open up on one of Bowser's airships. The setup is really funny as it presents being a minion for Bowser like a normal day job, only with more potential for mayhem as well as out-of-place references. We get our first fight intro in a really long time, and it feels incredibly fitting for a battle like this. The actual combat starts off pretty slow, but there's a good reason for that I'll bring up later. Instead of pondering how the hell a Waddle Dee got here, I'll instead focus on how impeccable the sound design is. We get so many fun callbacks to the Mario universe like the P-Wing, Paper Mario attacks, and the Warp Pipes. We even get the Mario and Luigi attack HUD. FYI, Bowser's Inside Story is one of the first games I ever played as a kid, so if you thought this episode was nostalgic for me before, holy crap. Goomba kicks Koopa away in what I have to assume is a callback to the original. Then a Bob-omb explodes after a humorous delay, and we get into the section of this episode where the real fight begins. It's a dramatic thunderstorm, and without the crowd watching, it's clear that Goomba and Koopa are no longer fighting just for show. They're out for blood. Even the music takes a more intense turn. Koopa begins to use his defense as a source of offense, and we get a slight increase in this battle's speed. So Goomba takes to the sky and uses Boomstick's patent-pending baby launcher. Okay, I know they're supposed to be his babies, but it happened off screen. You have no way of proving that I'm wrong here. Koopa then brutally eats one to gain flight of his own, and the speed picks up even more so, to the point where they start leaving after images. One of the many things this battle does so good is sell the feeling of escalation. We're constantly going up the tiers of potential destruction in natural ways, and we haven't seen the half of it. Koopa grabs Goomba and delivers easily one of the coolest throwing attacks I've ever seen. It gives off major So Long Gay Bowser vibes. The force of the throw is enough to break apart Bowser's airship, and then after regaining composure, Goomba uses the wreckage as an attack of his own. Great use of the environment, but Koopa once again uses his shell to avoid deadly damage as well as close the gap. The resulting impact leads to a moment of silence that takes great inspiration from those scenes in war movies where an explosion went off and the characters are forced to look upon all the death and destruction. It feels like forever since we've gotten a moment like this in Death Battle where the characters and the audience just get a moment to relax after all the action. An unfortunate side effect of having a shorter runtime. Meanwhile, Naked Koopa, a good callback to Mario 64, attempts to reclaim his shell only to be abruptly blindsided by Goomba in a green shoe as well as the music, which manages to get even more epic than before. Left completely vulnerable, Koopa stumbles onto a go-kart and speeds off. The feeling of speed is phenomenal. It doesn't just rely on background action lines. We see Koopa himself visibly affected by the G-force with his trail of tears due to the lack of a windshield. He grabs a power-up and is probably the first person ever to be excited by landing on a green shell. He utilizes these tools for an excellent moment of strategy by faking Goomba out with the cart and hitting him with the shell. With his main method of attack regained and Goomba getting back up again, we have finally entered the climactic finale. As made clear by the insanely awesome sprite portraits from the stare down, we get a small squabble of choreography that's incredibly satisfying to watch thanks to the sound design, and Goomba lets off a kick so powerful it sends Koopa over the horizon. But Koopa rolls with it and lets the momentum of Goomba's kick take him around the fucking planet, to the point where it gets so fast he's coming back like a freaking bullet multiple times. But then Goomba realizes he can go higher and sends Koopa to the moon. Once again, the sound design is the highlight of this scene and is at its absolute best. It's hard to say why it works so well with words. Just compare the sound design of this scene to the sound design of planets blowing up in Hulk vs. Broly, and you'll begin to see why the sound design of this episode marks a significant step up for the channel. We then get a gloriously ludicrous sequence of Goomba getting into essentially a tennis match with the moon, and okay, it goes without saying the YouTube ending is better, but I don't think we should sell the alt too short. It may not be nearly as chaotic, but I like what it was going for. Goomba takes a moment to be like, wait a minute, and just casually steps to the side, causing Koopa to catch fire and get brutally dragged across the earth and then bored. Goomba's move is funny for how simple it is compared to everything else that's happened, and this ending absolutely takes it in brutality, but there's just no competing with the other one. First off, I can buy that Goomba wouldn't be logical enough to just move out of the way since they're not really famous for their strategy. Because of this never give up attitude, Koopa ends up going so incomprehensibly fast that he shatters the fabric of space and time and then travels through time. It even leads to cameos from all the other time-traveling combatants we've had. Booster Gold in the process of being punched into a million next weeks, Flash and Sonic who gives yet another face that shows why I love his sprites so much, and of course, a bloody Hal who gets an idea from his favorite DBX on how to murder a little kid. Visual media doesn't create murderers. They just make murderers more creative. We end up right back at the start of the fight with even Ringmaster confused, but before things can go on as normal, future Koopa comes charging in as a rainbow-colored missile fueled by Goomba's own hubris to turn him into a bloody puddle, ensuring his death before the fight even began. How ironic. Oh, and we get one last Ben vs. Hal reference to bring us home. Bendy vs. Cuphead, you have officially been dethroned. To call this the magnum opus of DBX would be an understatement. It's that spectacular. Not only is the choreography well done. These are some of the best looking sprites I've seen from the channel. They are also wonderfully expressive and have even more freedom than Donald vs. Daffy due to the higher sprite count. This right here is visual storytelling at its best, and the only other death battle I can think of that comes close to it in this regard is Wario vs. DDD. The choreography is great at focusing on each of their strengths as well as their weaknesses. They both get gear specific to them, such as the shoe and the cart, since Koopa is the only one to be playable in Mario Kart. Goomba is tenacious and will get back up no matter how many times he's hit, but he's also brash and is left open by charging in head first. Koopa is a strategist and knows when to retreat into his shell for safety. However, this over-reliance on his shell can lead to him being put on the ropes very easily. The power escalation was flawlessly represented. Better than Thanos vs. Darkseid anyway. Everything on the ship was played mostly for laughs, but soon they took things more seriously, and after that the hits slowly kept getting bigger and faster. And of course the music followed suit, matching the rising intensity. And we're sure Mark Haynes didn't help animate this? Part of me is honestly disappointed this wasn't turned into a full death battle, cause it would have made for a fantastic joke episode. The joke being that the battle is played completely dead serious and is one of the most amazing things ever despite starring a goddamn mushroom and turtle. It would have certainly fit the legacy theme at least. This battle is the epitome of the phrase, they didn't have to go so hard, but I'm so happy they did. Superman vs. Saitama may sound more like a finale on paper, but it doesn't have shit on this behemoth. In fact, a vast majority of DBXs and even death battles to an extent pale in comparison. I mean shit, it reminded me of how amazing sound design can be. I don't think this episode would have been nearly as good without it, so I hope this is a sign of things to come for Season 8, and the fact that it's a rematch of my first death battle ever makes me one happy reviewer. Good luck on topping this one, Season 8. You've got your work cut out for you. Thank you all for watching. What were your favorites and least favorites of the season? If I get an answer for the best that isn't the obvious one, I will genuinely be shocked. And for the love of God, don't meme. Only say another episode is your favorite if you actually mean it. In the meantime, I'm going to see how many more poses Raccoon Bro can afford to get me in exchange for that red versus blue video. Take care.